Today's the day, guys, where we're finally going to talk about the SONY a6000, if it's still worth to buy in 2022. And in this video, guys, we're going to talk about the pros and cons from the SONY a6000. And at the end of this video, I will also give you my honest opinion if I would buy this camera in 2022. So yeah, I hope you enjoy this video. And quick disclaimer, I really feel I have to do this video because I own now this camera for around 2 years and I've been through this camera on so many photo shoots. I've done around 200 photo shoots already with this camera, so I'm looking forward to also share all my experience today in this video. So yeah, I would say we start straight away into the video and start with the pros from the SONY a6000. So basically, yeah, the SONY a6000 is a 24 megapixel APS-C camera and it can shoot up to 11 photos per second, and which is actually pretty cool because when you think about it, like most cameras like the SONY a7 III, which is like almost 4 times the price, it can only shoot up to 10 photos per second. And with the SONY a6000 you can shoot up to 11 photos per second, and this is actually pretty damn cool because when you're, for example, into sports photography or wildlife photography, you can do so many photos in a row, and this is something I feel is great still about the SONY a6000 in 2022. And speaking of the price, so basically the SONY a6000 is also a very cheap camera, so when you pick up the SONY a6000 today, you can get it for around 400 to 500 euros. And I remember 2 years ago when I was starting photography, I was literally so broke, I had no money to spend. I was back then in England and I was then returning home to Germany and I literally had no money at all, but I really wanted to get a camera. So I looked online and I saw so many different cameras and so many were so expensive. And with the SONY a6000, you only pay around 400 to 500 euros, and this is just insane. I mean, for a mirrorless entry camera, I feel like this is a great choice, especially for beginners who are on a budget. So that is why I went for the SONY a6000 2 years ago. And something which is actually pretty cool about the SONY a6000, in my opinion, is definitely that you have 179 autofocus points. And for some, this might be not enough anymore, but when you're a beginner out there, a beginner photographer, or somebody who doesn't have a lot of money and still wants a camera with a decent autofocus, I feel like the SONY a6000 is a great choice, even in 2022, because, I mean, with 179 autofocus points, you cannot go wrong. I mean, I had no problem at all with the autofocus. I mean, sometimes I wish the eye autofocus would be better with the SONY a6000, but still you can use, the autofocus. I use it, for example, with flexible spot, and for me, it works really good. So that's why I still believe the autofocus is pretty good in 2022. But on the other side, guys, there are a lot of cons with the SONY a6000. And the first thing is definitely that the SONY a6000 cannot shoot in 4K. And I mean, it can shoot 1080p. And for me, basically 1080p is great because I only do YouTube videos here in the studio, or when I'm on my photo shoot behind scenes, I shoot in 1080p. And for me personally, it works. But if you're a filmmaker out there or somebody who does a lot of client projects, and some clients today want you to shoot in 4K, and with the SONY a6000, that's not possible. So you really have to think hard if you want to go for the SONY a6000 if you're a filmmaker, because there's the a6100, for example, which can shoot 4K, and with the SONY a6000 you cannot shoot it in 4K. So it's very important to know this before you buy the SONY a6000. And another con about the SONY a6000, and this is something which I struggle so much with, is the battery life. So here basically you can see the SONY a6000 batteries, and I struggle so much with these because when you're, for example, doing a video here in the YouTube studio, or in general when you photo shoot for 2 hours or at least 1 hour, you do notice the battery life drains so quickly. And for me this is such a big struggle because I'm also suffering with the overheating from the SONY a6000, and I just wish it would be a bit better. I mean, there are so many other cameras in the same price range which have better which has better battery life. So I just wish this would be better with the a6000. And another con is that when you're, for example, vlogging, or if you try to, record yourself with the camera, the internal audio isn't as great with the SONY a6000. And also there's no flip-up screen and no audio jack. So if you're a vlogger out there, it's pretty hard to do good content with the a6000 because there's no audio jack which you can use, for example, for your Rode mic to vlog. And this is for me something, which is kind of difficult, because if you want to do video outside, you have to use an external recorder. But for me personally, if I would take my external recorder with me outside, it will blow away to the ground, it will break, or you're not as flexible. So this is something I dislike about the a6000. And another thing which I struggle a lot with the a6000 is definitely that there's no in-body stabilization. And especially when you're a filmmaker out there, and when you're, for example, doing handheld video, I have to say with the a6000, especially if you use, for example, the Sigma 3mm 1.4, which is a lens with no image stabilization, you do get a lot of shaky footage. And there's, for example, the a6500 or a6600, which have in-body stabilization, which perform much better than the a6000 when it comes to doing video handheld. So this is something you also have to know before buying the SONY a6000 in 2022. There is no in-body stabilization. So is the SONY a6000 now still worth in 2022? And this is actually a pretty good question. And a lot of people would say, no, the SONY a6000 is so old. I mean, the SONY a6000 has been released in 2014. And that is such a long time ago now. But I honestly still believe the a6000 is still a great camera, especially if you are a beginner photographer who is starting into just photography, because you get a 24 megapixel with 179 autofocus points. You can shoot up to 11 photos per second. You also enter mirrorless, which is also a great thing because most cameras nowadays are mirrorless anyway. Another great feature is also that it's a light and compact camera. And a lot of cameras out there are so heavy, so if you're just, for example, traveling, this camera is pretty good in my opinion because it's so small. I mean, like I said before, you can put it into your bag and go traveling. And also the lenses for the APS-C lineup are very small, so you're definitely good to go with the SONY a6000. But as I said before, if you are thinking about becoming a filmmaker or a photographer who wants this little extra, I mean, if you're a filmmaker or a photographer who also wants to shoot 4K or who also wants in-body stabilization, then I would definitely go for at least the a6500 or a6600. But it's really up to you, but you definitely have to know the a6000 is a great camera for photography. And for video, you have to be fine with the 1080p. I'm personally fine with the 1080p. I like shooting with this camera in full HD. It works for me. But some of us have more expectations, so it's really up to you guys. And I hope I helped you with this opinion. And at the end of the day, I still believe it's worth in 2022. And I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. And if you want to see more content from the SONY a6000, you can definitely also check out Michelle's Photoshoot behind the scenes on the top left. And guys, thank you so much again for watching. Take care and see you next time. Bye.